Welcome, everyone. We'll give it 1 more minute for additional folks to join, or potentially 2 minutes. And I can say good morning for 1 more minute until I can say good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today for the second CalHeatScore webinar. Spanish interpretation for this webinar can be found by clicking on the interpretation button on the Zoom menu and clicking Spanish. Seleccione su idioma preferido, Spanish, usando el menú desplegable en la parte inferior de su pantalla. And I'll pause for a moment as folks transfer over to the right language, their choice. Welcome, everyone. My name is Catherine Foster. I am a senior planner with the Governor's Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation. I'm proud to present this webinar in partnership with the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, or OEHHA, the UCLA Luskin Center for Innovation, and the Los Angeles Regional Collaborative for Climate Action and Sustainability, also known as LARC. Today's presentation is the second in a series of webinars focused on OEHHA's CalHeatScore tool. Today's presentation is focused on heat warning systems and CalHeatScore development. This webinar will begin with a brief welcome and an overview of Zoom features used throughout the presentation. We will then have a 20-minute presentation on heat warning systems, followed by a 10-minute review of CalHeatScore. Our closing session will focus on CalHeatScore development and next steps. Your questions on any of the content provided today are welcome. Please utilize the Q&A function. You can find it on your Zoom menu at the bottom of the screen to submit questions and also upvote any questions that resonate with you. You can use a like function, which is a thumbs up. We will also be utilizing polls at the end of the presentation to collect input. Time pending, we may also have time for public comments from the audience, but please use the Q&A function for the majority of your questions. It is now my honor to introduce today's panelists. First, we have Trace Lane, a senior project manager and researcher from UCLA's Luskin Center for Innovation. Trace's work is focused on extreme heat, and today she will be providing an overview of global heat warning systems. Next up, we have Walker Wieland. Walker is an environmental program manager from the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, or OEHHA, with Cal EPA. Walker plays a pivotal role in the development of CalHeatScore, and he will be providing an overview of the tool this afternoon. Last but certainly not least, we have Erin Bergren, Director of Special Initiatives at the Los Angeles Regional Collaborative for Climate Action and Sustainability, or LARC, who will be facilitating a dialogue on CalHeatScore development. I'd now like to welcome Trace Lane from the UCLA Luskin Center for Innovation to provide an overview of heat warning systems. Welcome, Trace.
Hi, thank you so much, Catherine. I'm really glad to be here. Today, I'm really excited to be sharing with everyone on the call the results of some research that my team at the Luskin Center for Innovation, the Heat Equity team, conducted in support of the CalHeatScore tool. Next slide. So our goal was to review existing heat health warning systems to identify innovative and leading practices. To do this, we consulted scholarly articles, practitioner reports, smartphone applications, social media posts, news reports, government websites, and the heat warning tools and systems themselves. When possible, researchers subscribe to the heat warning system to assess the tool from a user perspective. Next slide. Through this process, we gained insights about heat health warning systems from 17 countries. We reviewed a range of tools that included national tools, city tools, and multinational tools. Next slide. We scanned each tool for information across 7 different categories. Each category contains multiple indicators. From this process, next slide, we identified a total of 18 leading practices organized according to 4 categories. So here you can see the first category is metrics and threshold criteria for ranking heat. Here we were really curious about how people were calculating heat and the thresholds that determined the level of warning they would issue. We were also curious about the next category you see below, communication strategy for warnings. We wanted to know how and what the tools were communicating. And then we were also curious about the next category, recommendations and guidance included in warnings. We wanted to know what the warnings included and how specific they were. And then finally, we organized according to implementation approaches. We wanted to know how these heat warning tools were being implemented. Next slide. So today I'm going to share with you a few highlights from each category of leading practices and some examples of tools that illustrate that practice. Next slide. We will begin by exploring metrics and threshold criteria. Next slide. The leading practices in this category are focused on, again, the way in which heat is measured and how thresholds are established. The first leading practice is the use of health data to inform thresholds for heat warning systems. Biometeorological data or health-related mortality data may be more effective than using environmental data alone because it reveals the potential for health impacts associated with the categories of heat. In this practice, the ranking system is based on the increased risks of heat-related illness as the temperature increases. Next slide. And so here we can see an example of this. Germany's heat warning system offers a great illustration. The heat risk thresholds for Germany's heat warning system are based on a statistical relationship between human biometeorological criteria and temperature as a thermal index for heat stress and mortality. Air temperature, wind, humidity, and radiation are accounted for utilizing the perceived temperature measure. The heat risk thresholds that inform the system also include consideration of seasonal heat, cumulative impacts from thermal heat stress over the past 30 days, nocturnal temperatures, estimated indoor temperatures, and regional differentiation. Pardon me. Next slide. Our next example is from Argentina. SATE, or Early Warning Systems for All. The alert thresholds for SATE are based on the results of research that confirmed a statistical relationship between extreme heat temperatures and an increase in heat-related mortality. These findings were utilized to create the thresholds for SATE heat alerts. Next slide. The next leading practice is the consideration of duration, or the number of days that a heat event has persisted. This leading practice was utilized as a criteria threshold for multiple tools that were reviewed. This approach allows for consideration of the impact of a heat event over time and the potential need for an escalated response for heat events that are longer in duration. India's heat wave guidance offered an example of this practice, as you can see here. Next slide. Now, let's explore some of the leading practices in communication strategies for warnings. Next slide. For this category of leading practices, we were curious about how warnings were being communicated. This included linguistic accessibility, color-coded strategies, communication channels, and communication mechanisms. We identified these leading practices. Next slide. The use of smartphone applications to communicate warnings was commonly demonstrated across all the tools that we reviewed. This practice is really important because more people own smartphones than desktop computers, and because people can receive alerts while they're away from home. Brazil's Alerta Rio offers one example, though there were many to choose from. Next slide. Another best practice was having multiple modes of communication. This helps to avoid barriers in accessing information. Italy's Heat Health Watch warning system offers an example of this best practice. Their communication approach spans smartphone application to in-person communication, even using a loudspeaker with a car to warn residents in neighborhoods. This is a great combination of high-tech and low-tech communication. Next slide. Now we will explore leading practices and recommendations and guidance included in the warnings. Next slide. The leading practices here are focused on the intended audience for the warning and how tailored or specific the warnings are. Next slide. As we know, a key element of effective heat warning systems is the identification of heat vulnerable populations so that the appropriate guidance can be effectively delivered. The majority of tools reviewed noted the following groups are vulnerable to heat and should take precaution: infants, children, adults over 65 years of age, outdoor workers, unhoused populations, people who are chronically ill, pregnant people, and people playing sports. However, Italy's Heat Health Watch warning system demonstrated a particularly innovative approach to identifying and supporting vulnerable populations. In some cities, heat-vulnerable residents are identified based on data from health information systems, population registries, regional hospital discharge registries, and median population income per census block. In other cities, heat-vulnerable residents are identified by general practitioners and social workers. Individuals who are identified as heat vulnerable are then assigned a risk category. This information is distributed to health providers and social service workers during heat events. And then heat vulnerable residents are actively monitored through various support activities, including scheduled wellness checks and adjustments to medications as needed if it might lead to increased heat sensitivity. In addition, local implementation includes heat health training for medical personnel and social service providers. Next slide, please. This leading practice is focused on offering tailored guidance for key exposure settings. Exposure settings are places where people are commonly exposed to heat. This could include preschools, schools, elderly facilities, medical facilities, sports facilities, prisons, or other mandated locations, and other public facilities. Tailored guidance allows for implementation of population-specific measures to be taken to prevent heat illness. In the example seen here, we see an action card, which is part of the United Kingdom's Heat Health Alert. This is accessible on their website, and basically you just click the link and it directs you to a card that these various groups can use, and it offers guidance for how to manage a facility that supports a particular population. Next slide, please. The next leading practice is identification of local resources on a map. Here, we were curious about how residents were not only being warned about heat, but also directed to solutions. Arizona offers a great example of this leading practice with their Heat Preparedness Network web map. This is a GIS-based resource locator accessible to the general public. The tool tracks the locations of cooling centers, hydration stations, respite centers, and donation sites across 8 counties. This is especially useful in city centers such as Phoenix and Tucson. In addition to offering location information, the tool includes information pop-ups for each resource, detailing information regarding address, hours of operation, even pet rules, accessibility, and additional services. Next slide. And here you can see the legend to their map. Next slide. This leading practice is focused on personal heat exposure warnings. Heat is a very personalized experience, and the impacts of it can vary depending on a range of person-specific variables. Extrema Global is one of the tools we reviewed that serves multiple countries. It offers users a personalized heat warning and the ability to create multiple user profiles using a smartphone app. This could be very helpful in situations where a heat vulnerable person does not have access to a smartphone, but is within your social network or your family. The user can create a profile for themselves, for their children, grandparents, friends, and then when they receive an alert for the person, they can physically go and check on that person. Next slide. The next leading practice is issuing activity recommendations per heat threshold. Japan's national heat warning system, Heat Stroke Alert, is a website and a smartphone application that is used to notify the general public about extreme heat events that pose a risk of heat illness. Heat Stroke Alert offers recommendations for the level of activity, physical activity, that is safe for each level of alert based on guidance from the Japan Sports Association. Next slide. Australia's Heat Watch also offers personalized warnings. Here, users can build a personal risk profile. They can personalize their risk assessments and receive tailored cooling strategies based on severity of heat health risk. The risk profiles include health factors, age, housing status, anticipated sun exposure, access to air conditioning, and even activity level, which can include, are you going to be standing, seated, are you doing light work, potentially heavy work, walking outdoors, and even what type of clothing you're wearing. In addition, a personal heat risk warning device that is specifically designed for adults that are 65 years of age or older has been tested in Southeast Queensland, Australia. The tool, called Ethos, was developed by researchers at Griffith University. This is an in-home digital early warning system device, and it's designed to calculate indoor temperatures with a personalized risk score that includes indicators relevant to elderly users, such as the potential for pharmaceutical interactions with heat and limited thermoregulation abilities. Next slide. The Heat Stress Risk Index Forecast is another example of a personalized heat risk warning system tool that has been developed and prototyped in Delhi. So there are plans for expansion to all regions of India, and it will be used as a website and a smartphone application. Personal data that are utilized to calculate the risk score include gender, age, health conditions, body mass index, income, medications, information about work and home conditions, and lifestyle information such as caffeine intake, smoking, and sleep patterns. Next slide. Now we'll explore some highlights from the next category. Here we were really asking the question, how was this tool implemented? Next slide. So here you can see some of the highlighted best practices. We'll go through each one, but you'll notice that they tend to include planning approaches, networking approaches, and implementation approaches. Next slide. A leading practice that supports rapid implementation of a heat warning system is to add heat to an existing hazard alert system. This practice avoids duplication of alerts and creates efficiencies in communicating the alerts to the public by using existing communication channels and platforms. Brazil's Alerta Rio offers a great illustration of this leading practice because heat was added to an existing hazard alert system. Next slide. Another core leading practice in this category is the conference of specific authority and responsibility among designated agencies that is triggered in the event of a heat alert. This includes the establishment of an authoritative or regulatory body responsible for issuing guidelines, standards, and protocols that are intended to be followed during heat event. Santiago de Chile's Código Rojo, or Code Red, offers an illustration of this leading practice. For example, a Code Red alert confers decision-making authority within specific bodies of government. In a Code Red alert, the Directorate of Labor is permitted to suspend work if it is determined that the heat poses danger to the health and safety of workers. Next slide, please. Here we see another leading practice, heat warning systems being embedded in comprehensive heat action plans. Since the devastating heat wave that occurred in Europe in 2003, A national heat wave management plan has been presented annually by the Minister of Ecological Transition and Territorial Cohesion. The plan is focused on health and based on the Heat Health Alert System strategy for vigilance, and requires public authorities to monitor heat data in order to alert the public. In turn, each department or state has a unique heat response plan. Next slide, please. And finally, this leading practice is focused on national guidance for locally tailored heat warning systems. An important innovative leading practice is illustrated here by Canada's Heat Alert and Response System, or HARS. They offer an illustration of this leading practice with a national approach to heat management and governance that includes a robust support tool for local heat warning systems within provinces and territories. Each heat warning system in the supporting plan is developed through support mechanisms from the national level, but they're invited to tailor it to their needs, even considering their own unique local thresholds. And so that concludes the highlights from our findings. Next slide. I appreciate your attention, and I will pass it back to Catherine.
Thank you so much, Trace. I really appreciate that excellent overview of heat warning systems. It looks like we're a little ahead of schedule, so we do have a question in the chat if you're open to answering now. Ali shared a question here about sharing warnings too often or too frequently. Can you speak to the validity of that concern and or how to balance that concern with a recommendation to communicate in many modes, etc.? Can also pass to Walker to provide more detail as well if you'd like.
Certainly, thank you. That's an excellent question, and I think a very valid concern. Based on what we saw, the thresholds for the heat warning systems were very carefully determined. And so the assumption there is that you've reached a preemptive decision that when heat reaches a certain level, then it is time to issue the warning. So I think that would kind of sort of remedy that concern. But that's exactly, that's one reason why this is a very intentional process rather than just sort of a case-by-case basis. But I would imagine that Walker might have something to add.
Yeah, Trace, I think that tracks for me and makes a lot of sense. I definitely get the idea that folks may have notification fatigue, right? If they're getting a warning 20 days in a row, what sort of effect does that warning have for them, right? What sort of response do we expect them to have? So certainly something we're aware of and interested in thinking about. And, part of that in a way is what would help us adjust our models so that really the most extreme heat days, those highest rankings of extreme heat, we're careful about issuing those and really are rooted in our decisions and evidence of it being a day of concern and where folks should take action.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Walker, for providing additional context there. We have one more question in the chat, but I'm going to hold it until the end of Walker's presentation, and then we can take additional questions at that time. So I'd now like to introduce Walker Wieland from the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment to present on CalHeatScore.
All right. Great. Thank you very much, Catherine. And really want to extend our appreciation at our office to Trace and the UCLA team. Fantastic review of heat warning systems around the globe. This just really has me, thinking about how communities across the world are responding to extreme heat and developing warning systems. It really truly speaks to the urgency of the issue, and also is very helpful and a reminder that in California, when building out this system, we shouldn't be operating in a vacuum. We should be looking to some of these systems that are more mature, that have years of experience, that have tested these innovative leading practices. So just tons of great information in that prior presentation. And in my shorter presentation, I'm going to just really reflect on each of those four categories that Trace laid out and try to bring them a little bit back, zoom in a little bit more to California and CalHeatScore and our ongoing process in developing CalHeatScore. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. Great. So the way that I've organized my next four slides is I have the leading practice that Trace reviewed at the very top there. I have a column called pursuing, right? So this is to indicate that our office is doing this work in some fashion. Now, I want to be very clear. We're not done with this work. We're interested in building it out further, in really, making it more representative, but we are, beginning or in process. And so that's in contrast from the next column over called of interest. So that's kind of categorizing these leading practices into some areas that we either have not yet begun or we're just starting to work on and really wouldn't say it was necessarily implemented into CalHeatScore. So I hope that that makes sense. We've got this pursuing and then of interest. So this is all, we've looked at these global systems and the leading practices, and now we're coming back to CalHeatScore and sort of reflecting on them. So in the pursuing column, yeah, CalHeatScore does use this health data, this meteorological data to help inform heat threshold warnings. That's really an underpinning of CalHeatScore, is using the underlying community level health response to characterize extreme heat rankings. We're also looking at regionally contextualized norms to form these thresholds. So we're looking at local emergency department data, local climate and weather conditions to help build out CalHeatScore. So those two bullets are really fundamental pieces of how CalHeatScore has been initially built. However, there are some things that we've not yet done. So CalHeatScore doesn't yet consider duration of heat event, and we know how important this is. Day after day of heat, night after night of heat, the body can't cool down, right? So we're interested in folding in duration of heat into CalHeatScore, as well as this consideration of the compounding factors. You think of poor air quality, smoke in the air, and so on. There's a couple of different ways that this can be folded in. I think first as a supplemental piece of information. So what's the CalHeatScore? Also, what's the AQI? Kind of looking at both of those on one dashboard. But another more sophisticated way is actually folding in AQI information into the CalHeatScore rankings and influencing the rankings themselves. You can think of it kind of as a multiplier, right? So these are things that have incredible power to sort of improve our characterization of these metrics and threshold criteria, and we're looking forward to pursuing them. Next slide. All right, so on to communication strategies for warnings. So we are already working on linguistic accessibility for CalHeatScore. A lot of our modes of communication are available in more than one language. CalHeatScore is available in Spanish, and it's linked from our website. You can access the tool itself in Spanish, and lots of our communications materials, our methods documents, our website is available in Spanish. Now we know there are so many languages spoken across California beyond English and Spanish, and so we are looking to expand more on those languages over time. Color-coded alerts. I think that's a pretty straightforward one. CalHeatScore's rankings are not only numerical, but also color-coded based, and a special emphasis on making those accessible, those colors accessible for visual accessibility. Multiple modes of communication, right? So we do have CalHeatScore available on your desktop. It's available on your phone. We're putting out different kinds of communications on CalHeatScore via listservs, these webinars that we're doing, and other ways. But there are more ways that we can expand this, right? So we heard some really interesting. The example from Italy really struck me, where you're sort of you've got a megaphone out the car, letting people know that it's hot. And you can think of other examples, maybe different colored flags to raise in the air to indicate the severity of heat, text notifications, radio notifications. The list goes on. So those are areas that we are interested in pursuing. On the smartphone applications side, yeah, we've been doing work internally at OEHHA to sort of build out this contract at our office to start to build this idea of a smartphone app out. And this is so important, you know, being able to get notifications of extreme heat, being able to build out more user profiles for you or your parents or people that you know. The smartphone application is so powerful, and it's really something that we're excited to develop as we move forward. Next slide. Yeah, so identification of heat vulnerable populations. We are starting to pursue this, and the very simple way that we've begun this is providing infographics and charts on the existing CalHeatScore tool, showing information about age, race, and ethnicity breakdowns, and also information about those that are linguistically isolated, those that lack health insurance, and those outdoor workers in communities. So this is all designed to provide this background information on those who are heat vulnerable. Now, to be clear, information like outdoor workers and so on, that's not baked into the CalHeatScore ranking. It's just supplemental right now. So that really gets at some of the personal heat exposure warnings. I'm jumping to the of interest column now. And so there's so much power in being able to say, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing, and here are some of my risk factors. And being able to have those personalized warnings, I think, are incredibly powerful. And we're not there yet with CalHeatScore, right? We're providing these broader community level warnings, and don't have individual specific information, but we do think that is a possibility for the future. Hopping back over to pursuing identification of local resources. Yeah, this is part of the legislation that resulted in CalHeatScore. This is a key part, creating these resources that people can access on a map. So we're communicating risk of CalHeatScore, but we're also providing local resources to people. And we've started that by mapping out cool centers from different counties and cities on the CalHeatScore map. We really want to expand that and allow people to eventually add their own data to be able to explore relationships between other factors and heat, such as tree canopy and urban heat island effects. So we've begun this process, but we are excited to advance that. Tailored guidance. Let me just access my notes really quickly. Yeah, so tailored guidance for key exposure settings. So this really struck me. I think, Trace, you were referencing the cards that individuals could access based on whether you have a kid at school or if you're an older adult. This real tailored guidance. And we don't have this yet for CalHeatScore, but we are working with our partners at the California Department of Public Health, who do a lot of this health messaging and health guidance for Californians. And we're really excited to work more with the Department of Public Health to integrate CalHeatScore into their existing guidance, right? And that's a key thing I want to mention, is that with this CalHeatScore as this heat warning system, it's really meant to complement existing work that the state is doing to address extreme heat, including the really important guidance that Department of Public Health has for local governments, they have for schools, and they have for outdoor activities and so on. Activity recommendations per heat threshold. Yeah, so this is such an important one. I think of our CalHeatScore rank table, right, where we say basically what each CalHeatScore ranking means. Well, we've already gotten some great feedback where people want to hear, well, who is most at risk at these different CalHeatScore rankings, and what should we be doing? And that's something we're working on actively. Providing that information is really important to us, but it's also really important for us for the recommendations that we provide and the populations we identify to be based in science, right? To really have strong evidence behind these recommendations. We don't want to just throw these recommendations around. We want to take them very seriously. And what I mean by that is that you could provide recommendations as to what to do on a CalHeatScore ranking of 0 versus 4, right? I think that's pretty easy, but it's much more nuanced when we get to what to do with it when it's a 1 versus a 2, or who's at risk when it's a 3 versus a 4. So that's something we're working on and we're committed to adding to CalHeatScore over time. All right, next slide. Okay, implementation approaches. These are some of the most inspiring to me to hear about Trace. Expanding the warning systems to include heat as a hazard alert, embedding these in comprehensive plans. And you can see now that we just have one column and it's not pursuing, instead it's of interest. And what do we mean by that is that CalHeatScore is a very new system, right? We just launched this tool at the beginning of this year. This is the first summer of CalHeatScore. I really want to emphasize that to you all. And so, our goal right now is to build relationships and to get people to test drive CalHeatScore and start using it for different applications. And that's what's really going to allow us to start building out these implementation approaches, some of which Trace has reviewed with us today. So there's so many exciting opportunities here. I think of our partnership with Cal OES as being a great opportunity to sort of work an implementation on some of these of interest leading practices that you've listed here. But this is really where the rubber meets the road, in the sense that we have this system, right? So now how is the government using this to protect people? How are people finding the resources they need? How are we evaluating our tool to make sure that it's reducing the number of heat-related illnesses and deaths throughout the state? So these are all of interest, but if we have this webinar again in a year, I hope I can add a pursuing column to the slide. So next slide. Great, so that's it for me. I hope that was helpful, just sort of a reflection of Trace's presentation, thinking about CalHeatScore, and I will kick it back to Catherine or Erin.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Walker. We have a few minutes before we dive into the CalHeatScore development. So I'm just going to pull 1 or 2 questions from the Q&A. To begin, I think this is a question for Trace. If I'll read it out loud. This is from Philip. Do you have best practices to count heat-related deaths that were in part because of pre-existing issues or related to best counting heat-related impacts to population?
Yes, this is a great question. So this is really a key issue at the crux of the science for determining, what those thresholds should be. And so what we did, sort of our pathway through this information, was to, first look at what's publicly available about the tool. And then generally what we would find there is the scientific standing and research for how they determine this. And so typically it's based on, a variety of different modeling approaches where those factors are definitely considered in the analysis. But what I found to be really key is, of course, doing, as you do with a review like this, a research activity, you just go as far back as you can to the original source. And once you get there, that's where you start to see what the research practices are that sort of support all of these other steps. And so I think if I'm understanding your question correctly, that's what you're targeting, is what are those research practices. So we don't get down into that level of granularity in our report, but frankly, you know, we're still in version 2 of the report. There are so many different areas of important information that we want to pursue, and it's really helpful to know that you want to know that. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Trace. And thank you, Philip, for your question as well. And then a final question around CalHeatScore for Walker. On the smartphone application side, have there been conversations about potentially having too many multiple emergency preparedness apps? Vanessa shares that they personally have MyShake, WatchDuty, and Genesis.
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa, for that question and input. I wanna be clear that folks will be able to access CalHeatScore in a variety of ways, right? So we talked about smartphones having this ability for notifications, setting user profiles, the alert, piece of it is I think important for smartphones. However, the tool will continue to be available as a mobile-friendly website. It'll continue to be available as a desktop site. And it's also key for us to ensure that CalHeatScore is interoperable. And what I mean by that is that we want this tool to work nicely with other systems that are out there, right? So one example is some work that we've been having with the California Office of Emergency Services, making sure that CalHeatScore works in their systems for situational awareness as they evaluate all kinds of hazards that are out there. So I think for our approach, it's more about flexibility and making CalHeatScore available in a variety of ways so that people can really choose, what kind of tool or system works for them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Walker, and thank you, Trace. And now I'm going to pass to Erin Bergren. Erin Bergren is a director at the Los Angeles Regional Collaborative for Climate Action and Sustainability. For this section of our session, we'll be using a variety of polls. So welcome, Erin.
I just want to clarify, I'm the Director of Special Initiatives, as opposed to the director. I'm not the boss, alas.
Apologies, Erin.
Or perhaps that is a joy for me, kind of is. So I am here to facilitate a discussion about which aspects of these heat best practices are most important to you all attending this webinar. I think this is a really valuable source of data for us thinking about what the community prioritizes for CalHeatScore and what you already value about CalHeatScore. So Catherine, could we pull up the first poll question? So the first poll question is about these metrics and threshold criteria that Trace and Walker were discussing earlier. Which of the following metrics and threshold criteria leading practices do you think is the most valuable? Use of biometeorological data to inform heat threshold warnings, regionally contextualized norms in threshold criteria for warnings, consideration of duration of heat event in threshold criteria for warnings, or consideration of compounding factors in threshold criteria for warnings. Please just select the one that you think is most important or most valuable. Fantastic. So it looks like the #1 response was consideration of compounding factors and threshold criteria for warnings, but it was closely followed by use of biometeorological data. Walker, would you like to respond to this?
Yeah, thanks, Erin, and thanks everybody for responding. You can tell that this section of the webinar is really kind of, now that I've had a chance to reflect, now it's time for you to reflect, right? And prioritize what you think is most important. And at OEHA, we're taking this information and taking it very seriously in regards to the research that we're prioritizing moving forward. So um, I saw that there's a real close, almost a tie between a couple of these. I think the consideration of compounding factors is a really interesting one for Californians in the light of wildfires across the state and smoke exposure that might be fresh in some of your minds, and the sort of interplay between smoke and heat. So that's definitely an interesting one. Um, Trace, I wonder if from your research, if you might sort of highlight any examples around compounding factors that you thought was notable.
Sure. This was a really interesting one, especially given that we're in California. I personally sit in Los Angeles, and so I'm always thinking about, heat plus wildfire smoke plus, other air quality issues. And so I was really curious to explore this in particular. And if I remember correctly, Brazil, Alerta Rio, they factor in air quality, which I thought was really wise. I think that also Argentina might do the same, and actually several others. So I think that this is becoming a more commonly shared understanding that these factors work together, and the science behind it stresses the body in a very unique way.
Absolutely. In some recent conversations around CalHeatScore, I've heard, well, you're supposed to, um, it's it's very smoky outside, so we need to go inside, but now we have to, run the air conditioning, and so we have this cost, and so there's really a sort of cascading effect, I think, of poor air quality, extreme heat, and the kind of health and also economic impacts. So definitely at the front of people's minds. Could we go to the next question?
Which of the following communication strategy leading practices do you think is the most valuable? Again, we're going back to these ways of optimizing heat warning tools that were discussed earlier by Walker and Trace. So linguistic accessibility or accessible language, easy to understand language, simple color-coded alerts, smartphone applications, or multimodal communication, having more than one way to get the information and get the alert. Which of these is most important or valuable to you?
Oh,
Yeah, we've got a strong winner on this one. 70% of respondents chose multimodal communication as the most valuable communication strategy. And as a disaster researcher, I'm kind of happy about that. That's the one I would have picked, but I'm not allowed to vote. So Walker, I know that this is something that CalHeatScore is already looking at.
yeah, this is such an interesting response, and so grateful for y'all's input here. Um, um, we have heard this as well, and I spoke recently with some older adults, and they said, myself and my friends, we don't have smartphones, and we get information from our senior center, right? And so I think um, uh, we really need to not necessarily lean so heavily into the tech side. Of course, having this map is very valuable, but we need to be really creative here and maybe take a step back in terms of how we're disseminating information about extreme heat warnings. Um, um, Trace, I go back to the Italy megaphone out of the car example. But I wonder if are there any other sort of examples that you came across of innovative uses of multimodal communication?
I think that you really hit the nail on the head with what you were describing earlier about just making sure that we cover a very broad spectrum of communication because, while it might not sound like the most advanced, technologically advanced kind of communication, it's still just very important to have that person-to-person verbal and then also have really engaging and accessible printed materials. And so what we were seeing a lot, in addition to the things mentioned in the presentation, was that like the ability to craft a flyer or a pamphlet that delivers information in a culturally accessible and fluent way, and then putting them in the right places. Knowing where the community hub is, where the community goes naturally to seek information, like what you were describing, and then positioning the information there rather than positioning it in a new place and expecting people to travel to the information.
Really good points. And want to add an additional shout out that Erin called out for linguistic accessibility. I talked about translation in other language, but of course, linguistic accessibility also makes sure that the information that we're presenting is understandable, right? So we want to be very clear in our language around CalHeatScore, in our communication of risk and recommendations in CalHeatScore. So, I think getting ongoing input on how we can make our tool and our program more accessible is also important. All right, next poll.
Which of the following recommendations and guidance leading practices do you think is the most valuable? Personal heat exposure warnings, identification of heat vulnerable populations, tailored guidance for key exposure settings, identification of local resources on a map, or activity recommendations per heat threshold. And as a reminder, this doesn't mean that we can't look at multiple options on this list, but we are looking to identify which of these is most important to you and your community.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction, Erin. Just because you choose one doesn't necessarily mean you don't think the others are important. And as I was indicating in my slides, we are hoping to tackle, all of these in some sense.
Oh,
Look at that.
and there we go. This is what I was thinking. 'Cause I was like, oh, they're all very important. So we
That's
have a
that's a
pretty
dead
even
heat.
spread. Yeah. Personal heat exposure warnings are at 12%, but there's not a huge gap between it and identification of heat vulnerable populations at 23%. But identification of local resources on a map and activity thresholds per heat threshold, those are all at the same place, 23%. Walker, is this exciting to you that we
Well, it
have this
is.
dead heat?
Yeah, it is exciting, and I think it was a nice, kind of a well-timed comment, lucky comment from me that we're not comparing these against each other necessarily. In fact, several of these are super important and priorities for our program with CalHeatScore. I think of maybe some of these could be particularly useful for different user types, right? So when I think about identification of heat vulnerable populations, just as an example, a local government, might really want to know in a particular part of their community who's most heat vulnerable during an extreme heat day and where they are, right? We are on the local resources side. We're doing this, and it is incredibly challenging to pull together locally available resources across such a large state, such as California. So we really are interested in hearing about how do we make sure that localities have ownership of this data, because they are maintaining it, right? Counties and cities maintain cool center information about when they open, when they close, what they provide to people. So how do we make sure that they maintain ownership, but that people that are accessing CalHeatScore can view that? Trace, I was struck by the example in Arizona that had this heat network, and it was across 8 counties, right? So California doesn't have a sort of centralized map like that. Anything to reflect on from the Arizona example and their mapping of resources?
Certainly. So this was a really great example. And one of the things that stood out to me was the kind of information that they offered to contextualize the resources themselves. So they went beyond just, or not just, but they went beyond a list of resources on the map, and they included that really crucial information about, the hours of operation. First of all, is this place open right now? And then even, is there an admission fee to go to this place? And then went so far as to include pet rules. So, thinking about a situation in which you would have to exit your home in order to be safe, well, you would want to take your pet with you if at all possible. And so you would be scanning for a resource that allows you to do that. And knowing that ahead of time can save you minutes. And in a heat event, minutes really matter.
Yeah, that's really great, Trace, and that's so important. Just ensuring that when we're doing mapping of resources in CalHeatScore, that it's exactly matching with what the local government's providing. Because the worst case scenario is a mismatch of information on local resources, and we want to make sure that we're in step with what localities are providing. Great. Shall we move on to our fourth category?
I think we're really starting to see how CalHeatScore is part of this larger ecosystem, if you will, of hazard information and preparedness. And so we segue into our last poll question, other than an open-ended question, which is, which of the following implementation approaches, leading practices, do you think is the most valuable? And again, you're not excluding the others, you're just choosing the one that you put number one. Expanding existing warning systems to include heat as a hazard alert. Heat warning systems embedded in comprehensive heat action plans. Delegation of authority and responsibility. National guidance for locally tailored heat warning systems, or ongoing transparent evaluation of what was effective based on after-event mortality reports and peer-to-peer learning.
This is going to be a really interesting one.
Okay.
Oh.
So the top response is ongoing transparent evaluation of what was effective based on after-event mortality reports and peer-to-peer learning, sometimes referred to as adaptive or iterative management. That got 44% of the vote, but we also have a lot of responses for expanding existing warning systems to include heat as a hazard alert. Walker, what do you think of this?
I think that folks are very interested in understanding how effective these heat warning systems are, right? So that's my sort of interpretation of the bottom item there. I think it may have come up in the chat. It's also part of the language and the legislation around CalHeatScore is for our office to develop metrics, right, that evaluate the effectiveness of CalHeatScore. So that is something that we're probably going to need some time, some summers to kind of build out. But we are but we are very interested in that. I can tell you that we're doing some work at our office around shorter term evaluation, and that evaluation involves questions like, how many people are aware of CalHeatScore, and are people changing their behavior, when they see a high CalHeatScore ranking in their community. So we're not looking at after event mortality reports just yet. That's on the horizon, but we are starting to look into evaluation of just awareness, right? And are there sort of behavior changes, something we're interested in? I think the other one on warning systems, including heat as a hazard alert. Yeah, we've been hearing about this as well, and I think it's about awareness, and it's about kind of recognition of the dangers of heat and kind of folding it in within existing warning systems as, yeah, heat should be up there on the list as well. So Trace, I'll kind of open it up to you on either one.
I just wanted to note that it is 1 o'clock.
Oh, okay.
And well, I really want to hear what Trace has to say.
Yeah.
I also want to be respectful of people's time and note that we've got one last poll question that I would like to just pop up. People probably need to hop off, but if you don't, Catherine, could you pull up that last poll question? So just in case you have some other leading practices that you wanted to highlight or bring to the attention of the CalHeatScore team, we have this poll question open. Was there anything not included that you think is important to have in a heat warning system? We're going to leave this poll question open as we close out this session, so people have time to type up their responses. You can take an extra couple of minutes. Catherine, do you want to click through to that last slide? So I just want to thank everybody for participating in what I believe was a very exciting webinar, really getting into some of the nitty-gritty of this very important, very valuable tool that we now have in the state of California. I wanted to thank Walker and Trace so much for your wonderful presentations. I want to thank Catherine for your superb facilitation, Mason for your support, and Francisco and Alessandra for being our interpreters extraordinaire. Thank you so much to all the participants who joined in, and I look forward to welcoming you to the next webinar, which should be held in the fall.
Thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate it.